After repelling our spaceborne fleets, the first species the Empire deployed against us were the Ragged, their most proficient planetary invaders. Although they succeeded in destroying the trading posts on the atolls, we had no difficulty keeping them contained there, as they had absolutely no experience in aquatic combat. Aside from a few minor luxuries, we are completely self-sufficient, so the loss of the atolls wasn't deeply felt. Then they sent the Namut, an aquatic species, but they're usually kept away from the front lines due to their lack of strategic and combat prowess. As expected, we obliterated each force they dispatched within a day of detecting their Contra signatures. About a year later, they ceased their attempts. Indeed, I had hoped the Empire would recognize the sovereignty of our home planet after that. So did I. But the third species they sent were another group of land dwellers who arrived with wooden vessels to preserve the air around them while traversing the ocean surface, somehow harnessing the wind that flows overhead. We tracked their contragraph signatures and pierced their vessels from below, releasing their air, a masterful tactic, I must say. The Kori fled in terror after only a few days, a fortunate stroke of luck as they become heavier than water and almost immobile when their fur gets wet. Now they plan to send a fourth species to harass us, one I'm not well acquainted with. Aeon, what kind of creatures are they? Regrettably, I only have fragmented information so far. They are a relatively recent addition to the Empire, and only as allies, not as an integral part. However, they are air-breathing land dwellers like most others, which is a good sign for us. They'll be confined to the air and surface. According to the latest Imperial maps, their home world has both continents and oceans, but all of their major cities are land-based. The only concerning point is that they possess remarkably advanced technology. But as we know, seawater greatly disrupts electrical power and radio signals, so they'll still be at a disadvantage in the depths. However, they lack the crippling weaknesses of the Kori. I see, they have no fur to speak of, and if these density figures are accurate, they would remain afloat unassisted, making them slightly harder to kill after we release the air from their vessels. That's why we have teeth and tentacles, is it not? They are not a predator species. How they achieved spaceflight, I cannot comprehend. Very well, put the Guardians on alert for contragraph signatures and concentrate them in the trade winds where the Kori prefer to land. Maintain a watch on the atolls as well. We will prevail. It will be done, sire. Admiral Miller steepled his fingers and considered the delegation sent to brief him. Along with the usual insect, reptilian, and avian representatives from the Empire's high councils, whom he had already met, there were veteran soldiers from each of the three-member species who had previously attempted to pacify the teens. All three, unlike the High Council members, were essentially mammalian, not that teens was the official name of the planet in question, whether by its natives or the Empire, but it was the one the translators had been instructed to use in English, since every official alternative was utterly unpronounceable. It was a water world, or, as scientists preferred, an Oceania, essentially what you'd get if you carved the Pacific Ocean out of Earth's map and called it a planet. It was an environment that no member species of the Empire had the faintest idea how to fight in. Humans, quite wisely in Miller's opinion, opted not to become full members of the Empire but instead fostered close trading ties in the name of peaceful coexistence, backed up, of course, by humanity's easily demonstrated ability to defend itself against any form of invasion. In fact, the early warning system and scout network had provided the key to halting the teen campaign of conquest. Earth, with its two-thirds ocean coverage, would have been a prime candidate for teen attention within a decade. That fact certainly influenced the decision to share intelligence with the Empire, which in turn conducted all the necessary combat operations within their territory. Now, in return for certain trading advantages, the Empire was turning to humanity for rather more direct assistance. The go-ahead had been given by politicians well above his already lofty position in the chain of command. His role was simply to do or die, or at least to make the best of it. Know thy enemy, hence today's briefing. But also, know thy friends. To human eyes, any alien stood out like a sore thumb. The three warriors across the table, however, were more striking than usual, though he was already somewhat familiar with the other species present. The most distracting, he decided, was the seal-like Namut, who kept dipping his head into the aerated wading pool his subordinates had set up for him. Such an obviously aquatic species would hopefully be the best source of intelligence on the teens. Privately, he suspected the Namut were not particularly well suited to combat. They had a dolphin-like beak lined with tiny teeth that suggested they hunted only small prey, and not enough limbs to both swim effectively and wield a weapon simultaneously. Against an aggressive apex predator, they would likely fare poorly, and from what he'd heard so far, they had. The most impressive, though, was the massive ox-like ragged, resplendent in what Miller hoped was only ceremonial armor. It looked completely impractical for actual combat. A pair of what he assumed were female ragged, half the warrior's height and width, fussed deferentially over him. By reputation, the ragged were indeed fearsome and effective soldiers by imperial standards, but had literally found themselves out of their depth on twos. That left the quarry, who looked like nothing more than a lion with an extra pair of limbs on its back and had discreetly distanced itself as much as possible from the Namut and its wading pool. But he remembered it was only the quarry who had bothered to bring anything resembling a naval vessel to bear on this particular military problem, and for that, he had to grant them a measure of respect. The problem was that an 18th-century British frigate would have taken one look at their ships and promptly capsized with laughter when what was obviously required was some sort of submarine. That the quarry themselves were physically incapable of swimming only added to their problems. Miller gestured to an aide, who dimmed the lights. Conversation, both translated and otherwise, petered out around the table, and he stood up to gain everyone's attention. "Shall we begin?" Blub thought it was sheer luck that he picked up the trace of the new invaders. He had been stationed in one of the dead zones far from the expected ingress areas, with plenty of wind, seemingly as punishment for various minor disciplinary infractions committed by his crew during their last leave period. Nevertheless, a steady contra-signature had been recorded, which he double-checked himself. There had been many short-lived false alarms over the past few days, to the point where he was starting to doubt the equipment's reliability. There was no time to send word back asking for reinforcements. He had to strike himself and quickly before these Aiden could possibly gain a foothold. Of course, he could report his victory and redeem himself and his crew for those minor infractions afterward, all the more so for doing so single-handedly. "Sire," called the echolocator urgently, "there is a floating object on the surface 8 kilometers ahead. It is moving slowly to the north." "Follow it," he ordered promptly. "Ready the drill, we'll deal with them the same way as the quarry." It was as if their enemies never learned anything from their previous failures. More importantly, it confirmed that the contra-grav detector was, in fact, working correctly. But easy victories were still victories and worthy of praise, praise that would be of great value come spawning season. The floating vessel did not react to their approach, even though its speed, a full 30 kilometers per hour, made the use of his own contra-grav drive necessary to intercept it. The fools probably had their detectors pointed skyward, expecting an airborne attack. And, of course, only a true aquatic race had a hope of hearing the pulses they used for echolocation. Experiments had long ago proved that underwater noises were undetectable above the surface. There, he pointed at a convenient ridge near the rear end of the vessel, whose bottom seemed larger and smoother than those of the quarry. "Use the grapple to steady us and drill our way through." "It will be done, sire," chorused the breaching crew overhead. Con sonar, Sierra 2, presumed hostile, has switched to medium-scale pinging, high frequency, acknowledged. "How's your tracking solution?" "Solid, sir. She's heading straight for the Trojan, 23 knots, 14,000 yards. We can put a fish in her anytime we like." "Good to know. Can they see us?" "Doubtful, she's the wrong side of the layer we're bonded to her, and their self-noise is appalling. Last time I heard a boat that noisy, it was one of those makeshift drug-running ones off Mexico." "Excellent. We get to sit back and watch the show." He frowned at his empty coffee mug and waved it at one of the smaller figures in the control room. "If you please, Xena." The female Ragged, serving as an assistant steward on board HMS Neptune, obliged silently and gracefully. The Empire had insisted that competent observers be present on board the first human ships to engage the enemy. Of course, the Admiralty had insisted equally hard on giving them something non-critical to do so they wouldn't get in the way.